Why do some people seem to attract wealth effortlessly, while others work for decades and still struggle to make ends meet? Why do some retire with confidence, freedom, and choices, while others retire uncertain, anxious, and dependent? Think about it. You and I went to school. We learned how to read, write, and calculate, but no one ever truly taught us how money works. We were trained to earn it, not to own it, to work for security, not to create freedom. That is why Cashflow Quadrant is more than just a book about finance. It's a mirror that reveals where you stand in the world's money game. It's a compass that shows where you could go if you choose to think differently. Welcome to SR Books Insights, where we bring the world's most powerful lessons to life. Make sure you follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode that could shift your mindset, and maybe your entire life. This is the story of Cashflow Quadrant, and the story of why some people never escape the race for money, while others learn how to make money race for them. Robert Kiyosaki was not born rich. He grew up on the island of Hawaii, surrounded by the beauty of the Pacific, but also by the quiet struggle of families trying to make ends meet. His father, a school teacher, believed deeply in the power of education. He told young Robert, "Study hard, get good grades, and you'll find a safe, secure job." He meant well, as most parents do. But that advice would lead Robert to one of the biggest discoveries of his life. Because across town, his best friend's father lived by a completely different philosophy. He was an entrepreneur, an investor, a man who understood how money moved. He didn't have a fancy degree, but he had something far more valuable: financial intelligence. These two men became Robert's two fathers, his poor dad and his rich dad. They both cared for him. They both worked hard. But they thought about money in completely opposite ways. Poor dad said, "Go to school and find a stable job." Rich dad said, "Go to school if you must, but learn how to make money work for you." Poor dad believed in job security. Rich dad believed in financial freedom. From those two men, Robert learned the most important lesson of his life. It's not how much money you make that matters. It's which quadrant your money comes from. He realized that people fall into four main categories, or quadrants, based on how they earn income. On one side of the quadrant are the E and S groups, employees and self-employed. On the other side are the B and I groups, business owners and investors. Those four letters, E, S, B, and I, look simple on paper, but they define your destiny. Because the side you live on determines how you live, how you work, and how free you can ever become. The left side, E and S, represents the world most of us were trained for. It's the world of working for money, the world of paychecks, promotions, and paydays. It feels safe. It feels familiar. But it is a cage disguised as comfort. The right side, B and I, is the world of the rich. It's the world of owning systems, building assets, and letting money work for you. It feels uncertain at first, but it leads to independence. Robert's entire mission became helping people move from the left side to the right. He realized that financial freedom isn't just about earning more. It's about learning a different language, the language of wealth. He often said, "You can't find freedom by working harder in the wrong quadrant." And that's where our journey begins. To understand the cash flow quadrant, we must first understand how people think about money and how those thoughts shape their lives. Imagine a young couple, John and Emma. John is an engineer. Emma is a nurse. They both have stable jobs, good benefits, and a mortgage that keeps them working late nights. Every year they earn a little more and spend a little more. They call it progress, but secretly they feel trapped. they're running on a treadmill that never stops. They're in the employee quadrant. They work for someone else's dream, exchanging hours for dollars. Their income stops the moment they stop working. And even when they earn more, taxes and expenses take most of it away. Across town, there's Daniel, a graphic designer who runs his own business. He left his corporate job to be his own boss. At first, it felt like freedom. But soon, Daniel realized he wasn't free at all. He was working longer hours, taking more calls, and carrying all the stress alone. When he got sick, his income vanished. Daniel is self-employed, the S quadrant. He doesn't have a boss, but he doesn't have freedom either. He owns a job instead of owning a system. Now meet Lisa. She started a small cafe with her husband 10 years ago. They built a team, trained a manager, and created systems that ran without them. Today, the cafe has grown into a chain of 5 stores. Lisa doesn't work in the cafe. She works on the business. She is a business owner, the B quadrant. Her system makes money even when she's asleep. And finally, there's Michael. He invests in property, stocks, and startups. He studies markets, understands risk, and lets his money multiply. He is an investor, the I quadrant. His money works for him, so he can spend his life doing what matters most. 4 people, 4 quadrants, 4 destinies. And the only thing that separates them is how they think about money. Robert Kiyosaki realized that the world doesn't teach this. Schools teach us to work hard for money, not to have money work for us. We are taught to fear mistakes, to avoid risks, and to look for security. But in reality, security is an illusion. The world changes faster than any paycheck can keep up. Technology replaces jobs. Inflation eats savings. And the rules of money evolve quietly while most people stay stuck in the past. That's why financial education is not optional anymore. It's survival. Robert used to ask audiences, "Where does your income come from?" At first, people would say, "From my job." Then he'd ask again, "No, from which quadrant does it come?" And silence would fill the room, because most people have never thought about it that way. He would then draw a simple cross on the board, E and S on the left, B and I on the right. Then he'd say, "If you want freedom, your goal is to move from the left to the right." It's that simple and that difficult, because moving quadrants requires a total transformation in how you see the world. When you live in the E quadrant, you think like an employee. I need a job. When you move to S, you think like a specialist. I'll do it myself. When you step into B, you think like a builder. I'll create a system. And when you reach I, you think like a strategist. I'll make money work for me. The journey from left to right isn't about changing jobs. It's about changing identity. Robert didn't learn this from theory. He learned it from failure, from trying, and from watching what worked in real life. After serving as a Marine pilot during the Vietnam War, he came home to an uncertain economy. He tried his hand at sales, at business, at ventures that sometimes failed miserably. At one point, he was homeless, sleeping in his car. But he kept learning. He kept listening to the lessons of his rich dad. Rich Dad used to say, "The reason most people fail financially is not because they're stupid. It's because they were trained to be employees." He explained that schools were designed during the industrial age, when factories needed workers, not thinkers. The system rewarded obedience, not innovation. It valued stability over freedom. And that's why even smart, hardworking people end up stuck in financial struggle. Robert began to see that if you wanted to be truly free, you had to unlearn what society taught you. You had to think like a business owner and investor, not like an employee. He realized that the rich are not rich because of luck. They are rich because they think differently. They use leverage, not labor. They focus on assets, not paychecks. They seek independence, not approval. That's what Cashflow Quadrant teaches. A new way to see money, work, and freedom. As Robert shared these ideas, people from all walks of life began to wake up. Teachers, doctors, engineers, artists all started asking themselves, which side am I on? And how do I move to the other side? Some took small steps, starting side businesses, learning about investing, buying assets. Others changed their careers entirely. But the real change began in their minds. Because once you see the quadrant, you can't unsee it. It changes how you think about every decision, every expense, every job offer, every opportunity. You start asking different questions. Not, how much does this pay, but what quadrant does this put me in? Not, can I afford it? But, will this create cash flow? That's the power of awareness. And that awareness is where your journey begins. Robert Kiyosaki often said his life was shaped by the voices of two men. One voice urged him to play it safe, get good grades, and seek stability. The other voice challenged him to take risks, learn from mistakes, and build freedom. Those two voices were constantly at war inside him, and truthfully, they exist inside each of us. Poor Dad's voice was the familiar one. He was intelligent, respected, and deeply principled. He taught his son the values of education and hard work. He believed the government would reward loyalty and the company would provide security. When Robert brought home his report card, poor Dad would say, "I'm proud of you, son. Keep studying and one day you'll find a good job." Rich Dad's voice was rougher, street smart, and full of contradictions. He didn't talk about getting a good job. He talked about owning jobs. He said things that made young Robert uncomfortable. The moment you depend on someone else for your paycheck, you give them control of your life. Don't work for money. Work to learn. As a teenager, Robert would spend mornings in school absorbing poor Dad's academic wisdom and afternoons sweeping floors at Rich Dad's store, learning real-world lessons about cash flow. At school, he learned about algebra. After school, he learned about leverage. At home, he learned to fear mistakes. At the store, he learned that mistakes were tuition for wisdom. Rich Dad explained that money was just an idea, and whoever understood that idea could control their destiny. He would point to the cash register and ask, "What is that machine doing?" Robert would answer, "It's recording sales." Rich Dad would shake his head. "No, it's measuring how well your ideas are serving other people." That statement stayed with Robert for life. Money was not the goal. It was feedback. If you served more people, you earned more money. If you created systems that served people even when you weren't present, you earned freedom. Poor Dad couldn't see that. He believed wealth was a zero-sum game, that the rich became rich by taking from others. He distrusted entrepreneurs and investors, calling them gamblers. To him, debt was dangerous and job loss was disaster. Rich Dad saw debt as a tool and risk as a teacher. He said, "The poor avoid risk and remain poor. The rich manage risk and grow." Two fathers, two philosophies, two destinies. Robert tried to please them both. He studied hard to make poor Dad proud, but every time he sat in class, he could feel Rich Dad's words echoing. Don't just learn to work for money. Learn how money works. He began to notice something strange. The students who got the highest grades rarely understood money. They knew how to solve equations, but not how to balance life. Meanwhile, The kids who were selling candy or fixing bikes after school, the so-called average students, were learning the real curriculum of the world, how to create value. After graduation, Robert followed the traditional path first. He joined the military, served honorably, and later entered the corporate world. He was earning well, traveling, wearing the suit, living the dream his poor dad admired. Yet he felt a quiet panic. He saw colleagues who had worked 20 years and were still waiting for promotions. He saw people proud of titles, but terrified of layoffs. And he realized he was inside the very hamster wheel Rich Dad had warned him about. That realization broke him open. He left the comfort of a paycheck and stepped into the unknown world of business. His first venture failed. So did the second. There were months when he couldn't pay rent, days when he questioned everything. But in those failures, Rich Dad's words returned. Every mistake brings you closer to mastery if you stay in the game. He learned to see failure not as a wound, but as a workshop. He learned that money was never lost. It only moved from the uneducated to the educated, from the fearful to the prepared. Robert began to map the invisible divide between his two fathers. Poor Dad lived on the left side of the quadrant, employee and self-employed, where income depends on personal effort. Rich Dad lived on the right side, business owner and investor, where income depends on systems and assets. The more he compared them, the clearer the pattern became. Poor Dad talked about saving money. Rich Dad talked about making money work. Poor Dad focused on degrees. Rich Dad focused on financial literacy. Poor Dad feared debt. Rich Dad used debt strategically. Poor Dad chased promotions. Rich Dad built people who earned them for him. That's when Robert realized the quadrants weren't just financial categories. They were mental worlds. Each quadrant came with its own language, fears, and values. In the E quadrant, people value security. They say, I need a steady job. I can't afford to take risks. In the S quadrant, people value independence. They say, no one can do it better than me. In the B quadrant, people value systems. They say, who can I trust to run this? And in the first quadrant, people value freedom. They say, how can my money serve me and others at the same time? Understanding that psychology is the real secret of Cashflow Quadrant. Because you can't move to a new quadrant with the mindset of the old one. Robert began teaching this concept long before the book existed. He drew the 4 boxes on napkins during coffee meetings. He used them to explain why doctors could be broke, while janitors could retire rich. It wasn't the profession that mattered. It was the quadrant they operated from. He met countless people trapped by invisible walls. There was Karen, a successful lawyer billing hundreds of dollars an hour, yet drowning in exhaustion. She envied business owners who earned more while working less. There was Tom, a factory worker who started a vending machine route on weekends. In 3 years, his machines generated more income than his salary. Different stories, same principle. Moving from working for money to having money work for you. Robert noticed something else. The transition always began with fear. Fear of leaving the paycheck. Fear of failing. Fear of judgment. That fear was the gatekeeper of the quadrant. He would tell his seminar audiences, courage doesn't mean you have no fear. It means you act despite it. He reminded them that the first step was rarely a leap. It was a mindset shift. Before you change your income, you must change your thinking. People asked him, Robert, what if I try and fail? He smiled and answered, then you'll be ahead of those who never tried. Failure gives feedback. Security gives nothing. Slowly, these teachings spread beyond classrooms and offices. They reached entrepreneurs, teachers, Mothers, retirees, anyone willing to question the old formula of go to school, get a job, retire on a pension. For the first time, ordinary people began to see money not as a mystery, but as a system they could learn. Rich Dad had once compared money to electricity. He said, "Most people fear electricity because they don't understand it. Once you learn how to use it, it lights up your world." Financial education, Robert realized, is the switch. That understanding lit his own world. He saw that real wealth had less to do with income and more to do with control. When you control your income, you control your time. When you control your time, you control your life. And that control only exists on the right side of the quadrant. By his late 30s, Robert had built and lost fortunes more than once. Each cycle taught him another truth. Money is temporary. Knowledge is permanent. Cash flow isn't about luck, it's about literacy. Freedom doesn't arrive suddenly. It grows through discipline. He distilled those lessons into a mission: to teach people the rules of money that the rich play by, the rules schools ignore, and the rules that can liberate anyone willing to learn. That mission became Cashflow Quadrant. When Robert first sketched the diagram for a seminar audience, the room went silent. Then people began nodding, whispering, pointing to their boxes. They realized that, for the first time, they could see their financial life on paper. It wasn't abstract anymore. It was visible, mappable, changeable. He told them, "This isn't about being rich or poor. It's about choice. The quadrant you live in is the life you choose." The audience erupted in applause, not because they suddenly had more money, but because they finally had clarity. That clarity is the first form of freedom. Every person who earns money travels one of four paths. Most never realize which road they are on until years have passed and the scenery no longer matches their dreams. Robert Kiyosaki called these roads the four quadrants: E, S, B, and I. He drew them as a simple cross, but in truth they are four completely different worlds. The E quadrant, the world of employees. The first world is the most crowded. It is lit by fluorescent bulbs, ruled by time cards, and measured by paydays. The employee quadrant is built on the promise of security. Work hard, stay loyal, and the company will take care of you. For generations, that promise worked, until it didn't. Factories closed. Technology replaced hands. Global markets replaced borders. The world changed faster than any employment contract could keep up. Robert once met a man named Stephen, a manager in a large airline company. For 25 years, Stephen gave everything: overtime, weekends, birthdays missed. Then one morning, a memo arrived: merger, restructuring, position eliminated. His dedication had been real, but the security had been imaginary. The employee quadrant feels safe because someone else decides. But that is also its danger. Someone else decides. Your income, your hours, your future, delegated. The left side of the quadrant trades control for comfort, and comfort quietly becomes a cage. Rich Dad used to say, "The paycheck is a drug. Once you taste it, you stop asking who you really are. The moment you depend on that check, fear enters. Fear of losing it, fear of change. That fear keeps millions trapped." The S quadrant, the world of specialists. Step a little to the right and you find the self-employed. They are the doctors, freelancers, designers, consultants, small shop owners, the proud soldiers of independence. They have left the boss but kept the habit of overwork. At first glance, the S quadrant shines with freedom. You decide when to work, what to charge, whom to serve. Yet every success expands your prison. The more clients you gain, the fewer hours you own. Robert once coached a photographer named Maya. Her art was brilliant, her schedule unbearable. When she stopped shooting for a month to rest, income vanished. She sighed and said, "If I'm not behind the camera, nothing moves." Robert answered gently, "Then you don't own a business. You own a job." The self-employed often value perfection. They say, "No one can do it like I can." That belief keeps them small. Rich Dad warned, if you can't trust others, you'll never scale beyond yourself. To cross to the next quadrant, an S must learn to let go of control, of ego, of the illusion that working harder means winning faster. Freedom begins when systems start doing the heavy lifting. The B quadrant, the world of builders. Business owners create machines that work whether they show up or not. They think in processes, not projects, in teams, not tasks. While the left side asks, "How do I do this?" the B quadrant asks, "Who can do this with me?" Robert loved telling the story of Jenny, who started selling homemade pastries from her kitchen. At first, she baked, delivered, handled invoices, and collapsed at midnight. One day, she realized she was the bottleneck. She hired a part-timer, then another, then a manager. Within 5 years, Jenny wasn't baking anymore. She was building. Her recipes turned into franchises. Her kitchen became a company. She had crossed from S to B. In the B quadrant, the skill is leadership. You move from doing to directing, from income to infrastructure. It requires trust, training, and time. But once built, a true system pays dividends long after effort stops. Rich Dad often compared a business to a pipeline. An employee carries buckets of water every day. A self-employed person carries 2 buckets faster. A business owner builds a pipeline, and water flows whether they sleep or travel. The pipeline is leverage. Leverage multiplies effort without multiplying stress. It is why one owner can earn what hundreds of workers cannot. The system works, even when the owner doesn't. The I quadrant, the world of investors. Beyond business lies the quiet power of the investor. Here, money obeys its owner. Capital flows like current through a circuit, into assets, out as income, back again with interest. The investor studies risk, opportunity, and timing. While others see crisis, the investor sees cycles. Robert tells of an old friend named George who invested in real estate during a recession. People said he was crazy. Prices were falling. Banks were nervous. George smiled. That's exactly why it's time. He bought properties others feared and waited. 5 years later, the market turned. His portfolio tripled in value. He didn't gamble. He understood cash flow. Investors speak a different language. ROI, leverage, dividends, appreciation. But beneath the numbers lies a simple truth. They own assets that produce income. Their days are shaped by choice, not necessity. In the investor quadrant, wealth is not measured by salary but by time. How long you can live without working and still maintain your lifestyle. That span of time is freedom's true definition. The bridge between worlds. Moving from left to right is not a jump, but a bridge. Robert described it as crossing an invisible river called fear. On one bank stands security, on the other, freedom. Most people build rafts of excuses. I don't have money. I don't have time. I'm not ready. But the river only widens the longer you wait. He advised taking small, intelligent steps, start a side project, learn investing basics, read financial statements, study markets. Each step weakens fear's current, Every mistake teaches balance. He loved quoting his rich dad, "Your banker will never ask for your report card. He'll ask for your financial statement." So learn to read the language of money. That language, assets, liabilities, cash flow, is universal. When you understand it, you stop chasing income and start creating wealth. Modern echoes of the quadrant. Look around today. Gig workers delivering food, coders freelancing online, influencers monetizing audiences, all live somewhere between S and B. Technology has blurred the boundaries, but not the principles. Those who build systems, apps, courses, communities, move toward B. Those who rely only on their own output remain S. Meanwhile, a new wave of investors has emerged. They trade stocks from phones, buy rental properties, invest in startups. Some do it wisely, others chase hype. The difference again is education, not opportunity. Robert would remind modern audiences, tools change, principles don't. The phone in your pocket can connect you to millions or distract you from meaning. The quadrant you occupy depends on how you use it. The emotional landscape. Each quadrant also carries its own emotion. E lives with fear of losing the job. S lives with fatigue, too much to do, too few hours. B lives with responsibility, the weight of leadership. I lives with uncertainty, markets rise and fall. Freedom does not erase emotion, it changes which emotion you're willing to face. Robert chose uncertainty over fear. He believed courage compounds like interest. Every time you face risk wisely, your capacity expands. And with that expansion comes options. The ultimate goal, Rich Dad said, is not riches, but purpose. Money is power, he told Robert, but power only reveals character. If you were generous before wealth, you'll be more generous after. If you were greedy, wealth will magnify that too. That is why the right side of the quadrant must be guided by values. Freedom without purpose becomes emptiness. Purpose turns money into a tool for impact. Robert saw this firsthand. Many who moved to the B and I quadrants used their success to create jobs, fund education, or support causes. True wealth circulates. It lifts others as it grows. Every listener reaches a point of decision. You can remain where you are, or you can begin the shift. The shift does not demand quitting your job tomorrow. It demands waking up today. It begins with questions. What skills can I leverage? What system can I build? What knowledge must I learn to invest wisely? Rich Dad's rule was simple. Acquire one new asset-building skill every year. Sales, leadership, accounting, investing, each becomes a rung on the ladder to freedom. And perhaps the most powerful skill of all is awareness, knowing which quadrant you're in and which one you want to reach. When Robert finally understood that, his life changed forever. He stopped chasing paychecks and started building pipelines. He stopped asking for raises and started asking better questions. And through Cashflow Quadrant, he invites you to do the same. Freedom always begins in the mind. Before a single investment, before a single business plan, the journey from the left side to the right side of the quadrant is a mental migration. You must think differently long before you live differently. Robert Kiyosaki used to say, "If you want to change your quadrant, you must change your context." Your context is the invisible box that shapes every decision, your beliefs about money, work, success, and self-worth. Most people were raised with the same script. Go to school, get a job, save money, retire at 65. That script worked in an era when jobs were permanent and currencies were stable. But the world has moved on, and the script has expired. Those who cling to it now discover what Robert discovered years ago. The rules have changed, but the players are still following the old rulebook. Paycheck thinking says, I work, therefore I earn. Cashflow thinking says, I create systems, therefore I am free. On the left side, income depends on hours. On the right side, income depends on assets. The difference is leverage. Leverage means doing more with less time, less effort, fewer mistakes. It is the ability to multiply impact without multiplying hours. Employees have almost no leverage. Self-employed people have limited leverage. Business owners build leverage through people and processes. Investors build leverage through money and markets. The right side of the quadrant is a playground for leverage. A book you write once pays royalties for years. A property you buy wisely pays rent while you sleep. An idea you franchise pays from places you've never been. Leverage turns knowledge into income and time into legacy. Rich Dad taught Robert to train his eyes. He said, opportunities are invisible to those who lack education. Most people walk past possibilities every day because they can only see what they were taught to see. A person from the East Quadrant looks at a building and wonders who works there. A person from the First Quadrant looks at the same building and wonders who owns it. Robert learned to ask new questions. Who profits here? What system supports this? Where does the money flow? The moment you begin asking those questions, your brain starts noticing openings that were always there. He remembered walking through a shopping district with his rich dad. They passed a popular ice cream shop. Robert said, "They must be making good money." Rich Dad smiled. "The owner of this building makes more. The shop pays rent even on rainy days." That single observation shifted Robert's focus from income to ownership. Money is only one form of wealth. Rich Dad told Robert, "The rich acquire 3 assets: a system that works, people who grow, and money that multiplies. Systems create consistency. They free you from the daily grind and guarantee quality even when you are absent. People expand capacity. By building leaders instead of followers, you magnify your reach. Money becomes a partner. It earns, invests, and compounds on your behalf. Together, these 3 assets build a life that operates even when you rest. That is real freedom, knowing that your income, your impact, and your influence continue without your constant presence. When people speak of wealth, they often mean financial freedom. But Rich Dad described 4 freedoms that appear sequentially. Freedom of time, the ability to choose how you spend your day. Freedom of money, the ability to choose without price as the master. Freedom of relationships, the ability to surround yourself only with those who inspire and uplift. Freedom of purpose, the ability to devote your life to what truly matters. Financial freedom is merely the doorway to the others. Once you have it, you can give attention to meaning. That is why the right side of the quadrant is ultimately not about riches, but about contribution. The hardest part of crossing the quadrant is not external, it's internal. The shift requires you to confront fear, doubt, and the desire for approval. Fear whispers, "What if you fail?" Doubt says, "You're not qualified." Approval asks, "What will people think?" Robert faced all 3. When he left his job, friends called him reckless. When his first business collapsed, relatives said, "I told you so." But Rich Dad reminded him, they judge from the quadrant they stand in. Their fears are not yours to carry. Every pioneer is misunderstood. Every entrepreneur is lonely at the beginning. but those who persist build paths for others to follow. That persistence requires faith, not blind faith in luck, but faith in learning. Faith that skills can be acquired, that intelligence can grow, that setbacks are seasons, not verdicts. Rich Dad often quoted a simple proverb, "A seed grows in darkness before it reaches the light." Robert discovered that financial freedom is impossible without financial education. You cannot manage what you do not understand. The alphabet of money, assets, liabilities, cash flow, expenses, is as vital as the alphabet of language. He encouraged people to read financial statements the way a doctor reads X-rays, not just numbers, but stories. An income statement tells how well you earn. A balance sheet tells how wisely you keep. The cash flow statement tells the truth, how money really moves. When you can read those three documents, you are no longer blind in the marketplace. You can see what others cannot see. Rich Dad once said, "Most people drive cars they don't own, to jobs they don't love, to pay for houses they barely live in." Financial education exposes that cycle and offers an exit. Another lesson from Rich Dad: buy luxuries last. The poor buy wants with borrowed money. The middle class buys comfort with earned money. The rich buy assets that pay for both. Robert learned to delay gratification. Every spare dollar he earned, he asked, "Will this dollar bring me more dollars?" That question became his compass. He bought small properties, then businesses, then royalties. Each asset became a worker in his invisible army of income. That army freed his time, and his time multiplied his learning. The right side of the quadrant plays the long game. Employees count hours, investors count decades. Patience is the partner of profit. Markets rise and fall, businesses grow and pivot, but principles endure. Rich Dad's calm advice to Robert during market crashes was always the same. Money moves in cycles. If you panic, you become the cycle. If you prepare, you profit from it. Preparation comes from education and discipline. That is why the rich keep learning long after school ends. They study trends, tax laws, technology, and human behavior. The more they know, the faster they adapt. To be rich is not to own much. It is to owe nothing, not to debt, not to fear, not to time. Rich Dad defined wealth simply: the number of days you can survive without working and still maintain your lifestyle. If that number is 1 day, you are poor. If it is 1 month, you are improving. If it is forever, you are free. Robert's goal was never to retire early. It was to reach the point where work became choice, not compulsion. That is the true destination of the quadrant. With freedom comes responsibility. The right side of the quadrant demands self-leadership. No boss tells you when to start. No paycheck arrives automatically. Your results are your reflection. Robert once said, "On the left side, you trade responsibility for security. On the right side, you trade security for responsibility. That trade is the price of freedom, and it's worth every cent." He often reminded his students, "The world rewards those who solve problems for others. If you want more wealth, help more people." That principle makes capitalism compassionate when practiced with integrity. By the time Robert published Cashflow Quadrant, millions had read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and were ready for the next step. He told them, "This book isn't about money. It's about freedom. It's about your life." Every listener has a quadrant story waiting to unfold. Perhaps you are an employee dreaming of independence. Perhaps you are self-employed yearning for scale. Perhaps you are a business owner learning to invest. Wherever you stand, the direction matters more than the position. Robert's promise is simple: If you commit to learning, practicing, and applying, you will move. Maybe slowly at first, but momentum builds. Freedom rewards persistence. So ask yourself now, which quadrant holds your future? Which mindset must you adopt today to walk there? Because you cannot escape the rat race by running faster. You escape by changing tracks. Robert's story began with 2 fathers. It continues with millions of students who now understand the map he drew. And now, it includes you. The question is no longer whether you can move quadrants, it is when you will decide. In part 2 of this audiobook, we will journey deeper into the practical side of transition, how real people have crossed from employee to business owner, from fear to freedom. We will explore the emotional and financial barriers that stop most travelers, and the simple disciplines that keep the few moving forward. You will learn how to build the mindset, the skill set, and the network that belong to the right side of the quadrant. Until then, remember this truth. Financial freedom is not a number. It is a narrative you author with knowledge, courage, and consistency. Write yours well. This is Cashflow Quadrant, narrated by SR Books Insights. This is more than mindset. It's a mission. Keep seeking, keep growing, keep giving, and together, let's make the world rich again.